begin.
Yes, okay. Whoever wants to go first can. I don't care.
So, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Finance Committee. I am Kristen Doyle, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for CPRIT. So with me today is our Vice Chair, Cindy Payne. Also with me, but not testifying, are our budget experts, and that's Deputy Executive and Chief Operating Officer Heidi McConnell and our Chief Financial Officer, Grant Weaver. So although this is my first time appearing before you as CPRIT's CEO, I have been with CPRIT from the very beginning when we opened our doors in 2009, serving as the agency's first general counsel. So thank you for the opportunity to provide some background information on CPRIT and our one exceptional budget item request, which I have summarized for you on page 4 of our packet. So CPRIT was created by the legislature and ratified by a state vote in 2007. We were reauthorized in 2019 with an additional $3 billion, again ratified by a statewide vote. So today we are a $6 billion initiative, and Texas is the second largest funder of public cancer research in the United States, second only to NIH. We're one of the top 10 public funders of cancer research in the world. On page 3 of your packet, I provided a high-level summary of CPRIT's investment in cancer research and prevention to date. So you know we've been awarding grants through a competitive, conflict-free peer review process since 2009. And so to date, the Oversight Committee has approved 2,038 grants totaling $3.75 billion. Those awards have been made to 151 institutions, organizations, and early-stage companies throughout Texas. Up to 10% of our funding may be committed to cancer prevention efforts, so you'll see the remaining 90% of our grant portfolio is allocated to various stages of research. And I note that we dedicate more than half of our portfolio to translational and clinical research. CPRIT is moving breakthrough discoveries out of our research laboratories and into patients. So I could talk all day about the tremendous work done in Texas by our grantees, but I will move on to our one exceptional item request. First, I want to thank the committee for incorporating CPRIT's request for 10 additional FTEs into the base bill. This will help us address our significant grant accounting and IT needs. And I wish to highlight at the outset that the requested exceptional item does not require additional funding, only appropriations authority within the agency's base budget of $300 million per year. So referring to page 4 of our packet, we are requesting a 10% increase to the salary limits for both of our exempt positions, the CEO position and the Chief Scientific Officer. An increase to the Chief Scientific Officer's salary to $738,000 would bring it closer in line with the salaries of comparable positions at institutions of higher education, such as medical school deans or comprehensive cancer center directors. Those average around $819,000. This is especially important to us now as we are in the process for a national search for our next Chief Scientific Officer. And this will be our 5th Chief Scientific Officer since CPRIT opened our doors. The requested increase the Chief Executive Officer's salary to $310,000 per year is to address the fact that the CEO's salary was not adjusted for the 5% year-over-year COLA provided to other state employees in the current biennium. This also will help us avoid salary compression. So the combined salary increases equal approximately $100,000 per year of the agency's annual appropriations. So the Vice Chair, Cindy Payne, will now provide her testimony on behalf of the Oversight Committee.
Senator Hall, do you want to ask this witness a question or you want the whole presentation? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Payne, and I have served on the CPRIT Oversight Committee since February of 2020. On behalf of the Oversight Committee, I want to thank this committee for including the 10 requested FTEs in CPRIT's base budget. I also want to convey the Oversight Committee's support for a 10% increase in the Chief Scientific Officer's salary. This salary increase will assist with CPRIT's search for the next Chief Scientific Officer. We believe this position is key to setting the foundation for the agency and ensuring the integrity of CPRIT's awards. And finally, The Oversight Committee supports a 10% increase in the Chief Executive Officer salary. The CEO salary was not adjusted by the 10% COLA provided to other state employees following the last legislative session. We believe this increase will also help avoid salary compression in the agency. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Senator Hall?
Oh, thank you. Where to begin here? Maybe there's a chart missing from your presentation, but I was hoping to hear something about something other than creating jobs and high salaries, something along the line of accomplishment, something that was actually tangible, that was being accomplished, or at least a talk about a goal of getting to something. And all I see is what's been going on for years and years, and that's researching cancer. Now, we all know cancer is a horrible, horrible thing. But is anybody so naive as to believe that a cure for cancer will ever see the light of day until the pharmaceutical companies and the medical communities figure out how they can make more money by curing cancer than they can by treating it? Not in a heartbeat. And the only question is these grants that are, because I see a lot of jobs. I mean, if the objective of spending this money is to create jobs, that's great. A lot of jobs, high paying. But do any of these grantees actually have a requirement that they produce something, or do they just get funded for a period of time to do research?
So let me start in terms of addressing what we produce. And in terms of the budget hearing, we were given 5 minutes for testimony. I could spend all day in terms of the tremendous work.
Talk a little louder.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I could spend all day talking about the incredible things that we are seeing in these 15 years since CPRIT started making awards. And when CPRIT was created, many of you are here, and you know it was the hopes and dreams that we wanted to see. And now with 15 years, we are really seeing those things play out. I'll talk about it in terms of humans. 10% of our money goes to prevention. A lot of that is in screenings. At this point to date, we've been able to detect 46,000 cancer and cancer precursors in people. So those are lives saved, lives extended, money saved. 440,000 Texans have received their first screening through CPRIT projects. That puts them on the pathway to continue to receive additional screenings, again, detected early. We've vaccinated with HPV and hepatitis B vaccinations more than 1 million people in Texas. What that means, especially with HPV vaccinations, is that we are preventing cancers for the rest of their lives. And it's not just cervical cancer. HPV is responsible for 9 different cancers, and 40% of those cancers are in men. So this is a tremendous investment that CPRIT, that Texas is making now in its children that will play out for generations, that they will not have to have those awful cancers that they're dealing with. We've invested in more than 300 clinical trials. We've treated nearly 60,000 patients through clinical trials. That's making innovative treatments that aren't available yet on the market available to patients. All of these things are making real differences in the lives of cancer patients and their families. And I'll say this to you, when we talk about, will we ever have a cancer cure when it costs, when the pharmaceutical companies are making more in treating it. I will say this, and this is a personal story. I celebrated my 20-year anniversary of my cancer diagnosis this week. And I was diagnosed with leukemia out of the clear blue sky. I ended up needing to have a bone marrow transplant. It was an arduous process. My mom and I, when we were driving home to Austin from Dallas, my mother said, and of course I knew that she was a nurse and she had spent her first year at University of Iowa, but she told me, she was on the pediatric floor her first year as a nurse. And in Iowa, in the late 60s, if you had cancer and you were a child, you were living on the pediatric floor of the University of Iowa Hospital. And she said every single patient she had that had leukemia died of that disease. And here we were in 2005, driving home from the bone marrow transplant that saved my life. And so just in the span of my mom's professional career, she saw that change. Now, I'll tell you, of course, I joined CPRIT in 2009. In the 15 years that I've seen, there have been dramatic improvements, even in bone marrow transplants. Again, just to personalize it to myself, when I was getting my bone marrow transplant, 30% of the patients who had bone marrow transplants died from the transplant itself. And we have been able to, make tremendous advances even in those treatments that are helping people today. So we're really seeing the outcomes, and Texas is leading the way. You'll hear from other witnesses, another thing that we do that Texas does better than anyone else is we have focused on childhood and adolescent cancer. So 13% of our research portfolio is in childhood and adolescent cancer. On a proportional basis to the federal government, we are 3 times investing in childhood and adolescent cancer. Again, we are saving lives and extending lives. And this is a tremendous thing that Texas is doing.
Believe me, there is nobody more interested. I lost parents to cancer. I'm a 24-year cancer survivor myself. I understand it. And my concern is getting to something meaningful for spending a tremendous amount of money. And you use key words a couple of times, prevention. Yet when I look at your plan, prevention is an afterthought. It gets a fraction, a small fraction, $394 million, and over here, academic research gets $2.6 billion. I would think that would be, my grandmother, who was a very wise woman, used to love to say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's cute, but it's the absolute truth. Because I believe that the preventions will be dirt cheap to find. And anything you're talking about curing cancer is going to be, because it will come through the pharmaceutical companies, will be extremely expensive, very difficult to get, and very limited to who can actually get it.
Agree.
But if we could actually start saying, this is what causes it, this is what causes it, and let's stop, I think we would actually do something meaningful. And that's my concern, is that we're not putting our money and our time where it ought to be. And it's reflected in the chart right here. And I know this wasn't here for you to come talk about the accomplishments, but I would love for you to come to the office and talk about specific accomplishments and why you think it's so important to put that much money into academic research that's kind of fun for the people in the academia to do, but seldom ever produces anything meaningful when we put such a little over in the prevention side. And I'm talking about how we're using our money here, because your list, all it talks about is creating jobs and paying high salaries.
So our statute limits us to 10% investment in prevention. And every year we have invested the maximum amount that we are allowed to invest in prevention, because you are absolutely
You're saying you're limited by legislation?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
That was how the CPRIT bill was
okay.
fashioned, so that it would go more into research.
And I'll say, for every dollar that we spend on prevention, we save $29 in medical treatment costs. Okay. So you're absolutely right that 50% of cancers can be prevented. Now, they can be prevented through things like stop smoking, lose weight, stop drinking, get your prevention screenings, all of those things. And those are things that we can do right now, and that we are talking about all throughout the state.
Okay, thank you. If we're the one that's in the way of that, I think we ought to figure out a way to get out of the way, because we're going to spend this much money. We ought to be spending it where it's going to do the most good.
You know what I would suggest you do is just a thought, since there, maybe some concerns by some members. You've done this in the past. Why don't y'all put together all what the academic research has produced in all these years? I actually have
absolutely.
been privy to some of that, as I'm sure Senator Colcourse has and others, and may reassure some, may not, but at least it's something that someone could look. Would that be helpful to you, Senator Hall? Just something to look at, and then he can make his decisions based on that. Just something that was put out. Maybe it's time to do that and
Well,
give it.
a great thing, as I will be saying, is this Friday we put out our annual report. We're
Good.
required every year. And we focus this year, we have a theme of clinical trials. Because we have done so much in clinical trials, we're really focusing everything that we're talking about around clinical trials.
That's an annual report. I think what he wants to see is what you've been doing all these years with your money.
Absolutely.
Okay? So that's a little different story.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be long. Just bullet point it. And I know some of the, Nobel Prize winners. I mean, it's impressive, okay? But, if you haven't been necessarily following it, it may not be impressive to you.
And I will definitely.
Okay.
We have been working our way through all of the senators, especially as the new CEO.
Sure.
I have reached out to every senator's office to get a meeting, and Senator Hall, we met with you. You were one of the first people that responded to us, and so we have met with you, and I have a pretty extensive packet. We go through it about 30 minutes about some of the things that we're really seeing in terms of what this means for Texans and patients. And you'll hear this also from some of the people that will be testifying at the end in terms of providing public testimony.
Thank you. Senator Hall, do you have other questions?
No, that's
okay. Okay. Senator Hinojosa.
Look forward to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me say, cancer is the big C. There's so many families, neighbors, friends that we know who've been impacted by cancer. But cancer doesn't have a simple solution. As we know, our economy is very dynamic. There are new products coming into the market that they cause cancer. And from my perspective, I think you all done an excellent job in research. And I remember when Senator Jane Nelson was chair of finance, and she was pushing for the proposition for a constitutional amendment for $6 billion authorization for CIPRIT, to create CIPRIT. And she worked the committee because the boards were not there. And she worked the committee, and it happened. And I think that was one of the best things that were done in this state, to create this CIPRIT, to be able to focus on research. And I know that people want a solution, a cure, like a magic wand, but it really doesn't exist. But we continue doing research as we identify different ways, not only to prevent cancer, but also to cure cancer. I have many friends. Both my parents died of cancer. I do have many friends, some family members, who had cancer. And quite frankly, their treatment stopped the spread of the cancer, and they lived a happy, healthy life, only because of the research being done to try to find ways to cure and focus and prevent cancer. And one thing I will say is that you have allocated quite a few funds for research to the 4 NCI designated cancer centers here in Texas, which are really the cream of the crop in cancer research. And everybody comes to Texas for cancer treatment, not only from the nation, but throughout the world. That I do know. And one of the reasons is because of the research that's being done in our different...
And the clinical trials.
In clinical trials.
Yeah.
But you have not ignored other regions, and you have now provided grants for different regions to help some of those institutions that are really focusing on research in cancer, to help out and come up with additional research to help find ways to prevent cancer and cure cancer. So for us, my family and my friends and my community, we're very happy and satisfied with what we could have done. Whatever necessary, whatever changes are necessary to be done to make it work much easier, much more effective. There's our goal. But I've been involved in CIPRIT for many, many years. I think before you, we had Mr. Roberts, who was a long-time person. We talked to him on a regular basis.
He's watching right now. So.
Well, and he did an excellent job. And I know you were the general counsel at that time, so you had a good mentor. So as far as I see it, I think you have done an excellent job in trying to find ways to cure cancer and prevent cancer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kolkhorst?
Thank you. Hey, Ms. Doyle, how are you doing?
Great.
Okay?
Yes.
All right, good. Have you enjoyed, I know you've been around CIPRIT forever, and now you're in this role, and we appreciate what you do. I think, one of the things when we did this in the first $3 billion, and Madam Chair, I'm glad when we look at the brain research or what dementia research that we're looking at, we're going to pay for that, not bonding it.
Correct.
And I always struggled with the bonding part. Okay, in business, I don't like to borrow for turning on the lights. I like to borrow for building buildings or a store or whatever. So I've always kind of struggled with that part. But as we look at, of course, on the page that the LBV showed us, where if I were just a taxpayer, I'd go. So for $3.75 billion, we've got $10.4 million return on investment. Not great. Okay. So just let me ask a couple of things. CIPRIT is really probably first and foremost maybe an academic recruiting tool. True or false?
I'd say false. Our number one work that we do is really the research. More than 55% of our portfolio is in both translational and clinical research. And I think recruitment, and you're talking about the CIPRIT scholars, recruitment is 29%.
So when you look at your grantees, who's your top grantee?
So UT Southwestern, MD Anderson, Baylor College of Medicine are the three top.
But I would kind of say that's academic recruitment.
Well, they do tremendous research and clinical trials.
Sure. It's money that we're spending to get researchers to move to Texas, hopefully they're moving to Texas, to do their research through those institutions.
And
so UT Southwestern number one out of the three.
They kind of
$75 billion.
MD Anderson and UT Southwestern
kind of go back and forth.
The
UT system is the big winner here. So of the $3.75 billion, what would UT Southwestern and MD Anderson have gleaned from that $3.75 billion?
I don't have that number with
I don't know that number.
Yeah, I can get that for you.
Yeah, let's look at that. So in ways we're doing this research, and we're doing it through our academic institutions, which is recruiting, which I think sometimes when we do Article 3, we're and all those exceptional items and all the research that they want and all this stuff, sometimes we kind of forget to look over here to see what they're getting from CIPRIT. And I'm just saying, and I do health and human services, a lot of work in that area, and sometimes we forget to look at LPPFs and all the other stuff that we're getting. So I always try to get a whole picture, because everybody's always here, with their handshake, and that's what we do is appropriate money. The other thing y'all do in kind of startup companies or companies that are trying to get to market, you probably. What's your bust rate on some of that? Is it high? How many have we really gotten?
So at this point, we have 6 products on market. One of them is a drug, Welireg, that is treating patients, and so that's responsible right now in terms of our revenue sharing, I think, for about $4 million. And let me take a step back. So we have a revenue sharing requirement, not just for the companies, but for all of the research that we do. So every research contract, so academic research, product development research all includes revenue sharing terms. So for our companies, and this is what KJ was talking about, for our companies, we have a royalty requirement. So it ranges from 3 to 5%, depending on how much money they're bringing in once they have a product on the market. They pay us those royalties until they've reached 4 times the amount of the award that CPRIT had given them. And once they reach that amount, then it goes to 0.5% as a continuing royalty. Many of our companies where we are investing, and this kind of goes to your bust question, we invest very early. That's what, that's the right place for Texas.
That's right. You're a fund early.
Yes. So we're phase
So your
one.
bust rate is pretty big.
Well, what I'd say is we're still waiting for the product to get to market. So they haven't necessarily busted. They're still working their way through clinical trials, phase 2, clinical trials, phase 3.
So how many have made it to phase 2 out of your products?
I can get you that information.
Yeah, I'm pretty technical here. So
yes, and you absolutely should be. That's, all of these things are ways of showing. Now, another way that you can look at it in terms of the companies that we've invested in, because of royalties, we won't make that money until they have a product on the market. And that could be 10 years away, before we start seeing that money in the door. But one of the ways that we can look at from a monetary perspective is the follow-on funding. So after CPRIT has invested, have other people invested in the company? And so to date, we're almost $800 million that we've committed to companies. And those companies have been able to raise $7.4 billion in additional investment. So after CPRIT put money in, they've been able to raise $7.4 billion. So that is a way to, kind of validate what CPRIT is seeing early on.
Yeah, and I think it's important to look at that metric because if truly I looked at your metric as, rate of return on page 4 of the LBB, I would say we're in trouble. Okay, so as y'all look at, different metrics, I think we do need to look to drill down in that and to consider that, how is it that, I want to know how many are in phase 2. I want to know where we're going in how our evaluation committees, do we have any business people on that? And I know you're going to say you do, but I can just tell you that researchers look at things very differently than someone that has had to make payroll at the end of the month or the end of every 2 weeks. And they're going to look at this and say, that's not a good investment. Let's move on. Because truly, it is the taxpayers of Texas. It's not $6 billion that they've invested. If you look at, because we bonded it, my gosh, I don't even want to know what that is. Probably $8 billion, $9 billion, probably $7 billion probably by the time we get, maybe a little less than that. But so what about also the quality of them? So the question would be, if you look at venture capital, other sources that are competing for some of those that are going to, the startups, do you think we get a second tier because they couldn't get their money, or you think we're getting first tier? So
we're first tier because we are investing where venture companies are not. We are investing early stage. We're helping those companies get the data that then allows them to attract the venture funding. So when I'm talking about the money that we have invested in those companies and what they've been able to get in terms of the follow-on funding, that is a direct consequence of what they have been able to do with the CPRIT funding. You've heard us talk about this before, the valley of death, where good ideas go to die for lack of funding. There's funding, at research institutions. There's funding from pharmaceutical companies, from venture funders when you're talking about phase 2, maybe late, early phase 3, But it's that getting that phase 1, that and for cancer patients, clinical trials really are being done on cancer patients. They're not healthy patients, where you're looking at the maximum toxic dose. These are all cancer patients. So you can also see some efficacy results that are coming out of these phase 1s, and that's helping them get the venture funding. Now, I'll say also, in terms of who we're having to look at, all of our recommendations all come from peer review committees.
So,
all of our grant recommendations that the Oversight Committee can vote on have to come from peer review committees. For the product development, we build the panel around the application itself. We almost always include at least one venture funder, as part of that panel. We'll include regulatory experts. We include business people who have taken products to market, so know when a company with bright shiny stars in their eyes about how they're going to cure cancer, they know the right questions to ask to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you got this in place? And many times, 90% of the companies that apply to us do not get money from us. Now, they're good companies, they've got good science, but they may not have been thinking far enough, or their indication is too small, and they will get that feedback from us. You need to get a secondary indication, you need to come, and makes them more business ready, to make it to market. Okay.
And I like all that. So I've asked for some information. If you could get that to all of the committee, I think it would be very helpful. Again, if we look at the ROI, it's somewhat of a disaster.
Well, let me say this again. We are looking at, this is patient money. And I mean patient in it is taking a long time for this investment. Patience, yes.
Not patient.
Not patient.
No patient is paying for it. Well, they are if they're a
yes, I know. I was like, well, okay. So, if right now, if you are starting in a phase 1 trial, it's likely going to be 15 years before that product makes it to market. That's where we're investing. Sometimes we're investing in preclinical. Obviously, with academic research, we're investing even earlier than that. So
your first
the investments that we're making now.
Your first grant was in
2010.
2010. So we're 15 years in it.
Yes.
And so if the idea was for you to be an evergreen, that you kind of, you were going to get enough royalty that it would perpetuate this fund, we're not sniffing it at $10 million. But
I don't know that we were ever set up as an evergreen fund. In fact, the money that comes in from the revenue sharing doesn't come to CPRIT.
It goes to general revenue?
It goes to paying off our bond funds.
Okay.
So that is not something that comes in that we reinvest or will ever reinvest. It goes to paying off the bond obligation.
Your last bond, your statute or the bond ends in, if we did in 2029, 2031?
So, there have been years that we haven't, put forward the full $300 million. There's some, if grant ends before it's expended, all of the money. So if we have a company that has stopped because they've had a significant adverse event, then that money goes back into the money that's available. So I think right now we're looking at 2031.
Okay.
In terms of.
All right, great. Well, let's get some of that and your grantees and the universities, the Texas universities that we fund, the number one recipients, and kind of see that. The prevention side, Senator Hall, that was in statute. I know Senator Huffman's carrying an important bill where we can look at some of that. I hope to be working on making Texas healthier, or making Texas healthy again, and chronic diseases. Really excited about the bill that I've been working on for several months now. All of that combined, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And Ms. Doyle, I just would impress upon you that if you just sat down in these notebooks and you started reading it, like Senator Nichols pointed out, and I highlighted the $10.4 million, we have to be able to have different metrics to see the value, because this is real money. It's bonded money. And again, we'd like to see who receives that. So as we do Article 3, we can see a whole picture and move from there. Thank you so much, and look forward to working with you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I wanted to ask, you said you've got 3 drugs on market that have,
We have one drug on the market.
just one.
So Welireg, which treats
Okay.
liver cancer.
Sorry, I thought I heard 3. And so the cost with that drug out, are we realizing any dollars back from that?
So at this point now, I believe that we've received about $4.5 billion back on
Million?
Welireg.
Million.
With an M?
Yes.
Okay.
On Welireg, and it continues. We get quarterly payments. So we just today received.
And how
quarterly
much
payments.
do you know how much we put into that drug?
$3 million.
All right. So for that, it's taken a long time, but it's at least met the goal of when you get a drug to market that's been proven good.
Yeah, I
that
think
we
it
do
made it
see
to
a
market in
return.
2023.
And for that drug, Welireg, they're not receiving any additional dollars from CPRIT. They're
no.
done. That was just in the research aspect. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, thank y'all for all the wonderful work you do. Because I know Jane Nelson, who we used to work with, now Secretary of State, was the one who brought this before the body way back there, and she was a real champion of it. And I know her dreams have come true because what y'all have with this program, what's been created, makes Texas kind of the envy of so many other areas, and anybody that has this terrible disease is heading to Texas because of what that program has done. The comment I had to do, and that related to the question I had, was on the intellectual property. One of the things you want to make sure we did is try to capture a royalty
Yes.
whenever possible, and it's always possible with these kind of programs. And the idea was that those revenue streams, the royalty, would continue to build over years. I know royalties don't go forever, typically like 14, 15 years, give or take. I think there are exceptions on some medical pharmaceuticals and other things that are extended longer because of the research and time to get them approved and get patents and stuff on them. But I was kind of surprised. I was tickled, first of all, to see that you were getting royalties, but I was very disappointed to find out that they come in and then they disappear in a short time frame. I think LBB said in 2.5, once they paid for themselves 2.5 times or something like that.
2.5 times and 4 times, depending on the product.
And let me be clear. So they're paying us royalties until they reach 4 times the amount. Once they reach 4 times the amount, they continue to pay us a royalty. It's 0.5% for as long as they have government.
0.5?
Yes. So they
Is
will
that
pay us.
something that's in statute that y'all restricted on that payout, or what?
So it's there are a couple reasons. No, it's not in statute. It's in statute that we have to have a revenue sharing agreement. So it's something that we have in our contract. So we discussed it with our oversight committee. We received input.
I think y'all negotiated yourselves down unnecessarily. I will tell you, I had 160 patents, or still do. I'm very familiar with royalties. You don't have to make them disappear. You can drop them down a notch to make them quite an incentive,
Yes.
but 0.5 is nothing.
So
You could extend that thing out. I would just ask that y'all go back and kind of review your policy on that, because I think you can do a lot better.
yes, I hear what you're saying, and we will talk about it again. I'll say this: part of why we looked at that amount and the 0.5% royalty tail is because CPRIT is often the very first large investment in a company. And so we're non-dilutive funding, which is very attractive to other investors. But if we have revenue sharing terms that are so significant, it will deter other investors from coming in because they won't see the upside for them to be putting their money in. And usually they're putting in a lot more money. We need them to be putting in a lot more money.
I understand, but the amount of money that some of these pharmaceuticals and stuff charge are very, very high, and the profit margins are way up there for a long time. especially if you have patent protection, and that's the only reason you get royalties. And
Right.
so you can negotiate a much higher position, and when you cut yourself down to 0.5%, I say you have negotiated yourself down, and I would suggest that y'all go back and review that. I would encourage you to go back
Yes.
and review that policy and work with some people, some attorneys that are really good at that. Because, yeah, they're going to put in a lot of money behind you, but they're not going to put in any money until after y'all put in money. So you're going to start the program, and you're the earliest one in there. You make things happen that would not have happened otherwise, and therefore you should command a higher position. Yeah, you really should.
Yeah, I know. I completely understand what you're saying, and yes.
That's all I had, but
We'll talk.
y'all do wonderful work. Thank y'all for what you do.
And
Madam
let me-
Chairman,
Yes.
I know the Lieutenant Governor's wanting to set up a similar program for mental
Yeah, dementia.
deterioration.
Uh-huh.
I hope that we put some kind of language related to.
I'll work with, I'm carrying the legislation. I will work with you on that language.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're the expert.
Have a good day.
I do want to add one thing. We've been talking a lot about the companies, but we have a revenue sharing agreement with all of our academic research also. So everything that we are doing in terms of funding anything at the universities, and that includes people that have been recruited through the Secret Scholar Program, anything that they touch, that they work on, that creates IP, we are getting that information. We have an IP database that we're going up and running that will exist maybe longer than CPRIT exists, that will continue to track that for the state. So that money will come back to the state through revenue sharing also. So I know we focused a lot on the companies, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew that it was in the entire research portfolio.
Senator Nichols?
If done properly, I think it can actually be much larger than your actual funding to start with. Very easily can.
Yeah, that would.
It'll make the 300 look small. Thank you.
So Coco, you had something else?
Just a quick follow-up. We were up here talking. Do y'all fund only in phase 1, or do y'all fund some phase 3?
So we're not in phase 3. We'll do phase 1. A lot of times with cancer clinical trials, you can do a phase 1, phase 2, because you're already in cancer patients. Typical medicine, phase 1 is toxicity level. It's the maximum dosage that you can give. A lot of times you're doing that with healthy patients because you're doing cancer drugs. They're so toxic anyway. You can only be testing them on cancer patients. So even in phase 1, you're getting efficacy results, although that's not the purpose of phase 1. So a lot of times there'll be a phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial, or you'll have kind of fast track designation. So we'll fund phase 1. We fund preclinical, phase 1, and some phase 2.
Okay.
But not phase 3.
And finally, I want to say something about the, and I meant to, Madam Chair, about childhood cancer and the research. That was actually an amendment that I put in committee with, I think Jim Keffer carried the bill. Boy, I'm reaching way back there, Representative Keffer. And in part because of family in Brenham, and a lovely family who has a nonprofit that helps parents with children with cancer, and they are just have a wonderful ministry. But it was brought to light that NIH and so much of the cancer research is never focused at children, and there's multiple reasons for that. Is the long-term, when they're children, could there be long-term effects? There's not as many children that get cancer, so it's not a money maker.
Exactly.
And so they really impressed upon me, and I was able to put the amendment on there that dedicated it. And I think we might be one of the only places in the world that focuses on that. Is that correct?
And 13% of our research portfolio, like I said, 3 times the amount of what federal government is doing,
Right.
proportionally.
I think
Yes.
13%. I think I chose that because it was District 13, House District 13.
Well,
I don't remember why it was, but
I'll
anyway,
say this.
It really that could, and I would love to see some of those products make it all the way through phase 3, and I don't know where we are on that, but if you could get me some data on where we are and what we're funding there, that would be great too. Thank you.
Senator Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just go back to something Senator Nichols is on. So a 0.5% of royalty is, so being first phase funders, your value is worth more. So when investors look at you to come in and some of that risk has been taken off the table, they expect less. I don't know if you're banking on the big corporate type lawyers to negotiate those deals, but you hold the leverage, you hold the cards. To your point, you're the first phase funding, which is the hardest money to get. And the closer you get to the end game, the less royalty or the less payment they should expect. In other words, first dollars are worth more. So I've never asked the royalty arrangement. I figured all of them were different. I figured they're all negotiated, but they got us. In a nice word, they held the checkbook of Texas to hostage, and they won the day.
Let me say this. The 0.5% is only after we have reached four times the amount. But so the royalties that they are paying us initially range from 3% up to 5%.
Yeah, but they're just reimbursing the cost of the program, right? Very much.
Well, they're getting to 4 times the amount of the grant.
Still, it's just that industry can pay. And when Texas fronts it, the first one out of the box loses the most. In the numbers game, you're more at risk than the guy that came in last time. So just rethink your whole negotiation process. We can do better. We can draw more money down. Private equity is not going to dry up because there's too much money in that market for private equity not to be in it. So I just think I wish I'd have asked the percentage 10 years ago. So we would be different shape today because they're not going to run from the biggest contributor as a state in government funding in the country. They're not going to leave us. I hear that all the time. If Texas does this, they'll just leave. Well, guess what? I hadn't seen anybody leave Texas for any of those threats because they can't find a better place to go.
All right. Thank you, Senator Perry. That concludes all the questions. Thank you very much for being here, and get your homework done. Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to Commission on the State Emergency Communications. George Purcell, if you'll present for LBB. James Beauchamp, presiding officer.